Hello, everyone. We're going to wait till more people join, as always. Hello, hello. We're going to wait for Brianna to hop in. How is your, what day is today? Thursday going? Okay. Okay. Wait. Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Guys, this is Brianna. Welcome back to the Brain PT again. She is my favorite neuro nerd. We are neuro nerd super friends. So welcome back, Brianna.
Thank you.
How's your day going?
Oh,
Can you
wait,
hear
what
me
was
okay?
that? I missed that part. What?
Oh, how's your day going?
It was busy, kind of. Not terrible. Busy at the end of the day, which you never want, but we made it here and we're ready to go.
Right. So guys, welcome back to another IG Live. Today we're going to be talking about neuroplasticity, our favorite topic for all neurotherapists. And let's just dive in. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Brianna. So she joined us a while back for another IG Live on vestibular. She loves vestibular. She did the Kaiser Neuro Residency. She graduated, she took her NCS, and she passed, and she's an NCS. So she works at Kaiser. Where are you at right now?
Stockton in Northern California.
Stockton, Northern California. Okay, great. And so tell us a little bit, like a fun fact about you.
Fun fact about me. This is really random, but it's also like kind of related to neuroplasticity because it's a specific skill, but I can play a pipe organ.
Oh, that's great. Let's see, the connection got kind of funky. Can you see us okay? Okay, there we go. Okay, the connection got kind of weird.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi is not being the best.
All right, so let's dive in. So today, guys, we're going to talk about neuroplasticity and what makes brains learn and change and recover after injury. So just to give you a little bit of, what is neuroplasticity and where does these principles come from? So neuroplasticity, it's the mechanism by which we learn. It's the process by which the brain encodes experience and we learn. Now, it's also the mechanism that brains use to heal. So when they're damaged, the brain relearns the lost or the lost function and relearns in response to rehab. So if you haven't heard about these principles are our everything. Okay.
Bread and butter.
Like we we breathe these principles because this is what really makes up, neurotherapy. And back in 2000, I believe it was 5, there was a conference. It was step 3, in which a lot of scientists and researchers, clinicians, and educators got together in this conference, and they were just talking about where are we in neuro rehab. So then this scientist scientist, his name was Jeffrey Klein. So he, after the conference, 3 years later, he wrote a paper with another person about like what happened at the conference and what came out from that conference. So pretty much he wrote about the 10 principles of experience-dependent neuroplasticity. So today we're just going to dive in and go very on these principles. So what the format's going to be today is Brianna will tell you one, and we'll jump in, and I'll tell you another one. So we'll kind of like throw the ball back. All right. So all right, let's get started with the first principle of experience-dependent neuroplasticity.
All right. So the first principle is use it or lose it, which is something that we really hear about all the time, especially when we're talking about, age or just any type of skill. If you don't use it, you lose it. So basically what it refers to in terms of, a more cellular level, our neural circuits degrade over time if we're not actively engaging them in a pertinent task, or especially a task that's kind of related to that specific function of the brain. And that what it also kind of ties into is that function might get lost by that brain area. And if that can't recover, it can get, taken over by another brain area, which is more of a compensation, because that area itself is lost and can't come back unless we incorporate these other principles of neuroplasticity and harness it to let it improve. So some examples of this, like if you're in like a dark space for a long time, like if someone is like has their eyes closed for a long time, or even if they're like trapped in a cave, the neuron responses and amount of synapses in the visual cortex in your brain will start to degrade over time because they're not being stimulated. In terms of more of a rehab perspective, practicing of skilled tasks soon after a brain insult will help to promote functional reorganization and thereby prevents the loss of function that would lead to the compensation by other brain areas.
So now leading to that, we have the principle number 2, which is use it and improve it. So now we know, after you are learning a skill, if you don't continue, you might lose it. But then what about use it and improve it? So this is what we do, okay? So pretty much it just means that permanent changes can be induced through extensive training or practice. So the improvements in sensory motor performance brought by skill training are brought by profound plasticity. Now, behavioral experience can improve behavioral performance. So some examples that you might already know about, it's force use, constraint-induced movement therapy. Practicing a skill over time will just strengthen those connections, and therefore the skill will be learned better, rather than just practice it one time and then kind of lose it, okay? So that's what use it and improve it.
So now that we know that we can do things to help improve, what exactly do we want to improve? So that ties into the third principle, which is called specificity. And that kind of refers to task specificity and motor skill acquisition for a specific task versus just using a damaged limb. Using it for a specific task helps leads to changes in gene expression, dendritic growth, synapse addition, and increased neuronal activity in the motor cortex and cerebellum. And people, scientists or people who have access to imaging can actually measure those changes through fMRI and TMS. So training a specific motor modality can then change the neural circuitry in the brain to help improve that task performance. Now, that's not to say, there's still things that we're not quite sure about how it generalizes to other functions, but we'll talk about that later with some of the other principles. But to move on to examples of specificity, Like just more generally repeating like a skilled ankle movement. The studies have been done on that. That helps to show enhanced corticospinal excitability. Whereas if you just move your ankle in an unskilled way, it doesn't show those same changes. So they're able to measure and obtain data on how the changes actually manifest in the brain. From more of a neuro perspective, like if you want to improve walking, you want to practice walking. It will improve walking itself. Maybe not improve other things, but we know for sure that it definitely will improve walking.
Right. So now that we have, let's say, picked something that we really want to practice, like a specific skill, walking or trance, okay? So the fourth principle is repetition matters. So just simply engaging in that task, it's not enough. So you need to repeat and practice to drive that plasticity. So the repetition of a newly learned behavior or skill may be required for lasting changes. So let's say you get like a sufficient level of rehab. It's just that amount of rehab it's required to like get the subject over the hump, but repetition might be needed after that to reorganize the brain and to create those like really extensive and lasting changes. So there was some information shared in another presentation, and it just describes how much practice does it really take to promote real learning. So I want you to just pay attention to these numbers. So if you're talking about retrievals, okay, so it takes 9,600 retrievals over 4 weeks to really learn the retrieval, okay? If you're learning a sequence, it takes 2,400 repetitions of 10 item sequences over 6 weeks. It takes 31,500 reps of, here they didn't specify what skill, over 35 days to really learn that specific skill. So these numbers are major. Okay, we're not able to do this in therapy because we're not going to do 31,000 reps. Like that's not possible. But the message here is, do you see how much practice it takes to learn? So it's not enough to tell your patient, go home 2 sets of 10 sit-to-stands. Like you really need to repeat the skill. Now, you also need to keep in mind, and this might tie with the next principle, keep in mind repetition without repetition. It means don't let them repeat a task that will get easy and therefore boring for the brain. You need to provide a challenge point for the task and a little bit of difficulty every time and intensity, which is our next one, to promote brain changes. So don't let the brain get bored and repeat.
Yes, yeah. So just like Lily said, besides doing something a huge number of times, it also has to be effortful and challenging enough to create those changes. So that's where the intensity matters principle comes in. You know, the magnitude and the magnitude that adds to the quantity of practice is important besides just the amount of repetition. You know, keeping in mind that you don't want to overdo things. To where it worsens function, which is usually more likely like early on when like things are very vulnerable. So that's something that we do want to keep in mind with that. And what the higher intensity stimulation does is it helps to induce something called long-term potentiation in our brain, which is basically just how we encode stimuli over time and process them through intention and memory networks to help create those lasting motor changes that lead to those prolonged permanent changes in behavior that we as therapists love to see over time. So some examples of intensity, the main one that's really big right now that is in the locomotor training CPG is heart rate intensity. With all of the data that they've analyzed and studies that they've looked at, they recommend targeting a heart rate max range of 75 to 85% when you're doing gait training, or 70 to 80% of heart rate reserve to ensure an appropriate intensity of gait training. Has to be intense enough for it to make a change.
Yes. Yeah. And so also another thing that we need to consider once we're working with a patient, right, we consider the next principle, which is time matters. And we hear about this all the time, you know, early out of bed mobility, early intervention, you know, and that means there's a window of time, after the injury in which learning is most effective. So in general, training soon after an injury is most effective. Okay. So after brain damage, there are many dynamic changes in just the neural environment. So there are occurring independent to rehab. So that's what we call, like, let's say when they have the stroke, and that's when, you know, the brain is kind of healing itself. But then, you know, we jump in with the rehab. So we just need to keep in mind there is a window of time in which we need to just push that rehab hard, and that intensity, that repetition, all that. So there was a study by Bernatsky, Turnico, and Corbett in 2004, and they found that a 5-week period of rehabilitation initiated 30 days after stroke was far less effective in improving functional outcomes versus a rehab that started 5 days post-stroke. So again, keep in mind that window. Now, here's another thing that you should be careful. Right after a stroke, you need to be very careful of not do high intensity right at the beginning, because there's also a very small window that it can be counterproductive to start with high intensity after stroke, like acutely. So we can provide some information about that, but yes, you can push the rehab, you can push that out of bed, you can push the, you know, the functional training, but just keep in mind the high intensity component for stroke, and, you know, maybe for TBI as well, when the brain is kind of like coming back, you need to be careful of the timing for high intensity as well. Okay, just to put that out there. We need to keep in mind when we do high intensity.
Yes, exactly. So now that we've heard a lot about learning kind of how to implement some of these principles, the next one is kind of like, okay, what do we do? So this principle is salience matters. And this is a wonderful, wonderful piece of neuroplasticity. Salience basically just means something that's important. So practicing motor tasks that are important based on our personal experience leads to better encoding and, you know, better long-term potentiation and motor learning. And what we have to keep in mind as therapists is something that might be important to us might not be important to our patients. So we really need to find out what are their goals, what are their hobbies, what are their interests, what do they love to do, because that's going to help us design a more unique and salient program for them to help engage those neural circuits that are responsible for salience. It helps to drive that experience-dependent plasticity that we're looking for. It's been shown that emotions modulate the strength of memory consolidation. So like I said earlier, memory and attention help with engagement to the task. If you're more engaged in a task, more motivated to do it, paying more attention to it, it's going to increase the way that your brain processes all that information and helps with learning. Just some examples, if we're talking like very like bare bones, like animal research, like playing a tune for an animal that's associated with a reward has been shown to help mediate attention better. Rewards, the reward network of our brain is very, very, very easily primed. So that's also, you know, very important to put into perspective for humans as well. In more of a rehab perspective, if a patient's goal is to improve an ability to walk outside, you know, gait training done outside or an environment that's more engaging to them may be more salient than doing gait training indoors. If someone wants to be able to like swing a golf club, practicing with a golf club and mimicking that as best as possible is going to be more salient to the patient than like using PVC pipes. So anything you can do to make it more personal and more unique and interesting for the patient.
Yes, I love this principle because
one of my favorites.
You need to explore the person in the patient. You need to really ask, what is your vocation? Tell me a little bit about you as a person. So you can start kind of like, oh, they like this, they like this, they like to do this.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very important.
Yeah.
And just keep in mind that different ages will demonstrate different likes or, you know, what they like, their hobbies. So just explore that. Now, talking about
I
age.
want to give a little plug to my student. So today we were working with a patient post-stroke, and my student took him outside, and this patient used to love to ski. So he put up like cones outside and made it like a little like slalom course for him. And he loved it so much more than just regular old walking. So
Yeah,
just a little plug.
and they have fun when we do that, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more dopamine release to strengthen those
Yeah.
memories of the skill, right?
Yes. Dopamine's my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the next one is age matters. So this one just says that the younger brains responds to respond to experience differently than an aging brain. And you know, that's true. Like, you know, now I forget things easily, and then it's harder to learn something than if I was a young girl and, you know, I was like very active and wanted to learn all these new things. So there's evidence of neuronal sprouting earlier and smaller sized lesions in younger brains. So pretty much it says our brains are more plastic when we are young, which is why kids pick up skills so rapidly. Okay. Neuroplasticity, even though younger brains learn better, still can happen when someone's older. You just need to consider all these principles, okay? So we all have the potential to learn, and just, you know, just consider younger brains. Maybe a younger patient with a spinal cord injury will recover a little bit faster than someone who's older and had a spinal. Okay.
Yeah. So the next principle that I'm going to talk about is called transference, and this kind of refers to how the skill learning kind of broadens out a little bit. Our circuits have, as part of their plasticity, you know, one set of neural may be able to promote or like nearby plasticity to some other circuits. And this has also been shown with like motor skill learning with TMS. They've done some studies like training like a fine digit task can create increases in corticospinal excitability and an expansion of hand muscle representation in the primary motor cortex. So it helps to increase stimulation in the part of the brain that's responsible for whole hand movements. We can also think about this as like with like transfers, like practicing transfers in one situation may transfer to improving a patient's ability to improve transfers in another situation, or even similarly with walking, like practicing walking in one situation over time may lead to improvements in other, you know, components and situations of walking as well. It expands a little based on our training principles.
Yeah, so here's what we need to consider, you know, also variability of practice, where we start varying the practice that way this principle can really, you know, show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I believe the studies related to the locomotor training, CPG, and like the high intensity gait training studies, they've been showing, even though they're not practicing balance specific tasks, but by doing the variable gait training activities, the patients are proving in like their Berg balance scores and different measures of balance.
Right, yeah. So our last principle is interference. So this one, it's very interesting. And so it just means that compensation may reduce likelihood of plastic changes. So here I'm going to show you a drawing that I made just to kind of explain this principle. So let's learn about the shallow well and the deep well. So when you're learning a skill, let's say this is the ball. So here is increased instability. So let's say here the ball, if you push it, you know, it might come this way or it might come this way, right? And let's say we practice a skill with the patient, let's say gait training, and we're not hitting all those like parts of gait that might promote as close to normal gait as we can. AKA we're teaching gait the wrong way. Okay. So then that skill is learned incorrectly. So then the ball will be in the deep well. So it becomes a well learned skill. So if we teach them a wrong, let's say a skill in the wrong way, like, gay, we're just teaching them to walk, but we don't care how it looks. Just walk. They're learning all these deviations and it becomes a well-learned skill. Once it becomes a well-learned skill, it's very hard to change. So you should teach a skill from the beginning correctly. It's your first shot and that's your only shot. So once the behavior is well established, it is really hard to change it. So just as, when we find a patient who had let's say now has a chronic stroke and they have this transfer skills and we're like, they're gonna fall. They're like, that's how I've been doing it all this time. And then we're like, ooh. So it's really hard to change it now. It's all neuroplasticity gone awry. So don't let your patient learn incorrectly, okay? Because you teach it well from the beginning. Because let's say handwriting, it's such a well-learned behavior. You're not gonna try differently every time. You've learned handwriting and it's the same every time. So it's in the deep well. So keep in mind this little graphic, here when you're learning a new skill, we're here, teach it well so it can be well learned. So interference is just when there's ways that you've learned a skill that might interfere with another way to do that skill, and it's really hard to change it if it's in a negative way. And if it's a very hard to change it if it's in a positive way. So it can go both ways.
So well said. So well said. I think one of my least favorite things is the step 2 gait after stroke. That is so hard to change once it gets ingrained. Oh my gosh.
Yes. So, you have one shot as a neurotherapist. So teach skills the proper way. And yeah, sometimes we might go, the compensatory way. But we always need to think about what things can we really recover. And, like altered gait after stroke doesn't have to be an altered gait. Like, are we really setting our standards very low? I mean, or our expectations very low after stroke? So we just need to teach skills correctly so they are in the deep well and they stay there. Okay. So don't let them teach right. Don't let them teach it, learn it incorrectly. So that's interference, when there's some learning interfering with new learning. Could be good or bad.
I remember learning those drawings in PT school with the wells. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So those are the 10 principles of neuroplasticity. So these are, like we said, our everything. Like, we need to be following these principles. We need to be thinking about these principles when we are prescribing interventions for any patient with neurologic injury, because we can teach them to learn after damage. So we are the ones who are facilitating the learning. We just need to keep in mind all these principles, and every intervention has to contain a couple of these principles so we can really push those brain changes.
Yes. How are we going to set our patients up for success?
Yeah. And brain's so complex to understand the circuitry and the networks and the synapse and all that. But there's another way to create functionally appropriate neural connections. That is through learning. And we are the ones who will promote that. Anything else, Brianna, that you want to share with us tonight about neuroplasticity?
Oh, it's just so great. Like, I just love it so much. Because it's really like the bread and butter of what we get to do every day. It's more than just doing a mindless exercise or like just doing something simple. Like what can we really think of? Like how can I push my patients to be their best? How can I challenge them the most? And the more that you use the principles of neuroplasticity, the more they become second nature to you, and it just makes it so much more fun to get to really incorporate all these things that the patients really need to help be their best, and what can we give them to guide them to their true potential.
Right, right. So for all of you guys who watch this IG Live, I encourage you time when you're with your neuro patient and you just learn these principles, or just, happen to be, this was like a refresher to your mind on these principles, challenge yourself and be like, okay, which principles am I going to use? And just so you can start incorporating, and like Brianna said, so second nature and just something that you do every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think another thing that's important to consider, like especially if you're a new PT or you're just new with neuro or not comfortable with neuro, is kind of like taking a step back and saying, like, it's okay, like if I have to put a little bit of extra effort into thinking of how I'm going to design these interventions for my patients. Like I spend like my nights sometimes like laying in bed thinking like, what can I do with this patient tomorrow, or like reflecting on a patient that I saw today and was like, was that really the best things that I could have done for them? So like the extra thought that we put into our patients' care goes a long way for them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming by to the Brain PT again. Just so you guys know, we will be having another IG Live about optimal theory. So these are, the principles, but now we're going to move on to other way to promote motor learning, that it's based on motivation and what really motivates you to learn. So we will be doing an IG on the optimal theory.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Brianna, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I always love coming on here.
Yay! All right. Well, you guys have a great night, and we'll see you next time.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.